She lit a candle, and the millionaire walked again. The frigid wind swept through the empty streets of Riverdale, Massachusetts, as Sophia Matthews pulled her threadbare coat tighter around her slender frame. Winter in 1933 felt colder somehow, as if the Great Depression had stolen the warmth from the world, along with everything else. 3 months had passed since her younger sister Claire's death from pneumonia. Pneumonia they couldn't afford to treat properly. The memory of Claire's labored breathing haunted Sophia's nights, a constant reminder of how quickly life could unravel. Sophia climbed the creaking stairs to her family's modest home, now eerily quiet since her parents had left to find work in Chicago. They'd begged her to join them, but she couldn't bear to leave the only place where Claire's memory still lived. Besides, someone needed to maintain what little remained of the Matthews legacy. The attic had become Sophia's refuge, a place where dust-covered heirlooms told stories of better times. That afternoon, while searching through an old trunk, she discovered a leather-bound journal belonging to her grandmother. Its yellowed pages contained wisdom passed down through generations, remedies, prayers, and rituals for healing broken hearts and spirits. One particular passage caught her attention. "Light a candle for what seems lost, and its flame will guide it home again." Something about those words resonated within Sophia's grief-stricken heart. That evening, she found a half-melted candle in the kitchen drawer and placed it on the windowsill facing Main Street. With trembling hands, she struck a match and watched the small flame dance to life, casting a warm glow against the frost-kissed glass. "For Claire," she whispered, "and for all that's been lost." Across town, Thomas Blackwell sat alone in his study, staring blankly at the collection notice that had arrived that morning. 5 years ago, he had been the wealthiest man in 3 counties, owner of Blackwell Steel and the town's largest employer. Now, at 42, he was a ghost of his former self. Company bankrupted, mansion in foreclosure, reputation shattered. The market crash of 29 had merely begun what his subsequent poor decisions had finished. Thomas raised the whiskey glass to his lips, the amber liquid burning a familiar path down his throat. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd survived the war only to be destroyed by his own country's economic collapse. His wife Margaret had left him 2 years ago, taking their son to her parents' home in Boston. He hadn't fought her decision. Perhaps she deserved better than to watch his slow decline. As darkness settled over the town, Thomas made his decision. He could no longer face the shame of financial ruin or the accusatory glances from former employees now standing in breadlines. He removed his father's service revolver from the desk drawer and placed it on the polished mahogany surface, its steel cold and unforgiving under his fingertips. Before he could reach for it again, a faint light caught his attention, a single candle flickering in a distant window across town. Something about that solitary flame pierced through his alcohol-induced haze, its persistence oddly compelling in the surrounding darkness. Thomas moved to his own window, watching the steady glow until his legs grew weary. For reasons he couldn't articulate, he returned the revolver to its drawer and collapsed into his armchair, falling into the first dreamless sleep he'd experienced in months. The following morning, Sophia was arranging meager produce at Harmon's General Store, where she worked for barely enough to cover rent. The bell above the door jingled, and she looked up to see a gaunt figure she recognized immediately. Thomas Blackwell, once the town's most prominent citizen, now as hollow-eyed and desperate as everyone else. "Mr. Blackwell," Mr. Harmon said, surprise evident in his voice. "Haven't seen you about town in some time." Thomas nodded slightly, his once immaculate suit now worn at the elbows. "I need some candles," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "And perhaps some coffee, if you have it." Sophia watched him curiously. The great Thomas Blackwell reduced to counting pennies for coffee like the rest of them. Yet something in his demeanor had changed from the arrogant industrialist she remembered. His shoulders, though slumped, seemed to be carrying a different weight now, not just defeat, but perhaps resolution. As she handed him his change, their fingers brushed momentarily. His eyes met hers, and Sophia felt an unexpected connection, a shared understanding of loss that required no words. Neither could have possibly known that this brief encounter would spark a series of events that would transform not only their lives, but the entire fabric of their struggling town. That evening, Thomas Blackwell walked again through the streets of Riverdale for the first time in nearly a year, his steps purposeful despite his weakened state. And in her small home on Pine Street, Sophia Matthews lit her candle once more, unaware that its light had already called something back from the brink of darkness, not her sister, but perhaps something equally valuable: hope. The Great Depression continued to tighten its grip on Riverdale as January turned to February. Snow piled in dirty drifts along Main Street, where more storefronts displayed closed signs each week. Sophia had taken to lighting her candle every evening, a ritual that provided small comfort in increasingly desperate times. Mr. Harmon had reduced her hours at the store, apologizing profusely but explaining that people simply weren't buying anything beyond absolute necessities. One particularly bitter morning, Sophia arrived at work to find a small crowd gathered outside the abandoned Blackwell Steel factory. Standing before them was Thomas Blackwell himself, his thin frame swallowed by his overcoat, but his voice carrying surprising strength. "I can't offer wages," he was saying, "not yet, but the factory has coal, and there's shelter from the cold. I propose we work together, pool what resources and skills we have, perhaps create something new from what remains." Skepticism rippled through the crowd. A former mill worker named Frank Porter stepped forward, his expression hard. "Why should we trust you, Blackwell? You closed these doors without warning, left families to starve." Thomas didn't flinch from the accusation. "You're right to question me," he replied. "I failed this town, failed myself. I can't change that past, but perhaps we can build a different future. I still own the patents to several manufacturing processes. What I lack is capital, and the right to ask for your forgiveness." Sophia found herself moving closer, drawn by the raw honesty in his voice. This wasn't the calculated speech of a businessman, but the vulnerable plea of a man seeking redemption. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked, surprised by her own boldness. Thomas's eyes found hers in the crowd, recognition flickering briefly. "A cooperative. Everyone who participates shares in whatever profits we manage to generate. I have knowledge and connections, or what remains of them. You all have skills and determination that I lost sight of years ago." The discussion continued for hours, moving inside the factory where ancient boilers still provided some heat. By afternoon, 23 people had agreed to Thomas's proposal, including Sophia. It was madness, perhaps, trusting a fallen millionaire who had contributed to their suffering, but desperation often made strange alliances possible. That evening, Thomas appeared at Sophia's door, hat in hand. "I wanted to thank you," he said awkwardly. "Your support today made others willing to listen." Sophia invited him in, offering the last of her tea. "I'm not sure why I spoke up," she admitted. "Perhaps because you seemed different from the man I remember." "Near death has a way of changing perspectives," Thomas said quietly, warming his hands around the chipped teacup. "I was ready to end everything that night. Then I saw a candle burning in a window across town. Your window, I believe." Sophia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty room. "My grandmother used to say a candle could guide lost things home." "Perhaps not just things," Thomas replied, his voice barely audible. "Perhaps lost souls as well." Over the following weeks, the unlikely partnership between Thomas and the townspeople began to take shape. They started small, repurposing scrap metal from the factory into practical items: cookware, simple tools, replacement parts for farm equipment. Sophia discovered she had a talent for bookkeeping, while Thomas worked alongside men who had once been his employees, learning the physical labor he had previously only overseen. Each night, Sophia still lit her candle, though its meaning had subtly shifted. It no longer represented only what she had lost, but what might yet be found. And across town, Thomas Blackwell worked late into the evening, drafting plans by lamplight, his steps growing steadier with each passing day. A man no longer walking toward oblivion, but toward possibility. Spring arrived reluctantly to Riverdale, patches of mud and melting snow, creating a patchwork landscape of grey and green. The cooperative Thomas had proposed, now officially named Phoenix Works, had grown to employ 47 people. They weren't getting rich, but they were surviving, which felt like victory enough in 1933. Sophia had become the unofficial heart of the operation, her natural empathy and organizational skills helping to smooth tensions and solve problems. She moved through the factory floor with quiet confidence, a far cry from the grief-stricken young woman who had hidden away in her attic months earlier. "We've received another order from Hartford," she told Thomas one afternoon, placing a telegram on his makeshift desk. A door balanced across 2 barrels. 25 sets of the garden tools. Thomas looked up from the ledger he was reviewing, shadows of exhaustion beneath his eyes, but a spark of purpose within them. "That's the 3rd order this month. Can we meet the demand with our current workforce?" "If we add a second shift, yes." "There are at least 15 more people in town looking for work," Thomas nodded, making notes in the margin of the ledger. "Have you considered what we discussed last week? About expanding into household appliance repair?" Sophia sat across from him, their professional relationship having evolved into something approaching friendship. "I've been asking around. At least 12 families in Riverdale have broken appliances they can't afford to replace. It could be a starting point." Their conversation was interrupted by commotion at the factory entrance. A man in an expensive suit strode in, flanked by 2 others carrying briefcases. Sophia recognized him immediately, Edward Hargrove, president of First National Bank and one of Thomas's former business associates. "Blackwell!" Hargrove called out, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "This is quite the operation you've established." Thomas rose to meet him, his posture straightening imperceptibly. "Hargrove, what brings you to our humble enterprise?" "Curiosity, primarily. Word has reached Boston about Phoenix Works, a cooperative, I hear. Quite the socialist experiment for a former captain of industry." The factory had gone quiet, workers watching the exchange with wary eyes. Many remembered how banks like Hargrove's had foreclosed on their homes and farms. "We prefer to think of it as practical American ingenuity," Thomas replied evenly. "Adapting to survive. Something you bankers should appreciate." Hargrove's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Indeed, adaptation is essential, which brings me to my purpose here." He gestured to one of his companions, who opened a briefcase. "I have a proposal that might interest you, Blackwell. My investors are looking to establish a manufacturing presence in this region. Your operation has demonstrated surprising viability." Sophia felt her heart sink as she understood the implication. Hargrove wanted to buy them out, return Thomas to the fold, and likely discard the rest of them. Thomas's expression remained unreadable. "I'm afraid Phoenix Works isn't for sale, Edward. We operate on a different model now." "Don't be hasty," Hargrove countered, removing documents from the briefcase. "This offer would clear your remaining debts and provide substantial capital. You could return to Boston, resume your place in society." For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Sophia watched Thomas, seeing the flicker of temptation cross his features. Return to his former life, his former status. Wasn't that what any man in his position would want? Thomas's gaze drifted across the factory floor, taking in the faces of those who had trusted him despite every reason not to. Finally, his eyes met Sophia's, and something passed between them, an unspoken understanding of what truly mattered. "My place is here now," Thomas said firmly. "But I would be interested in discussing a partnership that benefits Phoenix Works and all its members. Perhaps over dinner? My treat, though I should warn you, the local diner serves a rather limited menu these days." Hargrove's surprise was evident, but business instincts overrode his disdain. A partnership with a cooperative? Unprecedented, but intriguing. "Very well, Blackwell. Dinner it is." Nay, as Hargrove and his associates departed, promising to return that evening, the factory erupted in nervous chatter. Thomas made his way to Sophia, who was attempting to process what had just occurred. "You turned him down," she said quietly. "He offered you everything you lost." Thomas shook his head, a genuine smile softening his once severe features. "Not everything, Sophia. He offered me wealth and status. Empty things that nearly destroyed me. What I've found here is purpose, community, a chance at redemption." That night, Sophia lit her candle as usual, watching its flame flicker against the spring darkness. Across town, Thomas Blackwell sat with bankers and investors at Riverdale's modest diner, negotiating not for his own benefit, but for the future of an entire community, truly walking again as a man reborn through purpose rather than privilege. Summer brought unexpected prosperity to Riverdale. The partnership Thomas had negotiated with Hargrove's investors provided Phoenix Works with capital for expansion while maintaining their cooperative structure. What had begun as a desperate attempt at survival had evolved into a model being studied by struggling communities across New England. On a warm July evening, the town gathered for a celebration in the square, the first public festivities since before the crash. Tables laden with shared food stretched along Main Street, and someone had rigged electric lights in the trees, their glow reminiscent of fireflies against the twilight sky. Sophia stood slightly apart from the crowd, watching children play without the haunted expressions that had become so common during the worst of the Depression. Their laughter felt like validation of everything Phoenix Works had fought to achieve. "Quite the transformation," came Thomas's voice beside her, "for the town and its people." Sophia smiled, turning to face him. The past 6 months had changed him physically. His frame had filled out with honest labor, and sun had bronzed his once pallid skin. But the most significant changes lay deeper, in the calm purpose that had replaced his desperate shame. "I was just thinking about Claire," Sophia admitted. "She would have loved this, seeing the town come alive again." Thomas nodded, understanding the bittersweet nature of such thoughts. "Your sister's memory has touched more lives than you might realize. If you hadn't lit that candle for her, it guided you home," Sophia finished softly, "just as my grandmother promised." Their conversation was interrupted by Frank Porter, the worker who had initially challenged Thomas at the factory. Now Phoenix Works production manager, he approached with an envelope in hand. "Latest figures," he announced proudly. "We've officially employed 100 people as of today. And the new appliance repair division has a 3-week waiting list." Thomas accepted the envelope with a nod of appreciation. "This is your achievement as much as anyone's, Frank. More so, perhaps." As Frank rejoined the celebration, Sophia and Thomas walked slowly along the perimeter of the square, their steps falling naturally in rhythm. "I received a letter from Margaret yesterday," Thomas said after a comfortable silence. "She and James are planning to visit next month. She was intrigued by the news of Phoenix Works." Sophia felt a momentary tightness in her chest at the mention of Thomas's estranged wife. "That's wonderful. I'm sure your son has missed you terribly." "She's remarrying in the fall," Thomas added, his voice carrying no bitterness. "A professor at Harvard. A good man, from what mutual friends tell me." "And how do you feel about that?" Sophia asked carefully. Thomas considered the question as they paused beneath an elm tree. "Relieved, primarily. Margaret deserves happiness, and James deserves stability. Our marriage died long before the crash. I was simply too absorbed in wealth and status to notice." The music from the square changed to a slower melody, couples beginning to dance in the warm evening air. Thomas hesitated, then extended his hand to Sophia. "I never properly thanked you," he said, as they joined the dancers, "for speaking up that day at the factory, for believing change was possible." Sophia allowed herself to be led into the gentle rhythm, acutely aware of Thomas's hand at her waist. "I didn't do anything special. I just recognized something in you. Perhaps the same thing I was searching for myself. A reason to keep going." As darkness settled fully over Riverdale, the celebration continued, a community reborn through collective determination and unlikely alliances. Later that night, when Sophia lit her candle, as she had every evening since discovering her grandmother's journal, she noticed something different. Across town, other candles flickered in windows, dozens of them, a constellation of hope replacing the darkness that had gripped Riverdale for so long. The following morning, Sophia found Thomas waiting on her porch, a newspaper in hand. "Have you seen this?" he asked, offering her the Boston Chronicle. The headline read, "Depression-Era Miracle, How One Town Refused to Fail." Sophia scanned the article, which detailed Phoenix Works' cooperative model and its impact on Riverdale's recovery. "They're calling it a potential blueprint for other communities," she said wonderingly. "Representatives from 3 neighboring towns are arriving tomorrow," Thomas confirmed. "They want to learn how to establish similar operations." "Can it really be replicated?" Sophia asked. "What we've built here seems so specific to our circumstances." Thomas leaned against the porch railing, contemplative. "The economic model, certainly. But the true foundation? That's harder to quantify. It required someone to light a candle in the darkness, Sophia, to believe something lost could return. As summer progressed into autumn, Phoenix Works continued to expand, and Sophia found herself traveling to other communities, helping them establish their own cooperatives. Thomas focused on innovation, developing simplified manufacturing processes that could be implemented with minimal resources. Together, they had created something neither could have achieved alone, a balance of practicality and inspiration, caution and hope. On the anniversary of Claire's death, Sophia stood at her sister's grave, a fresh bouquet of late wildflowers in her hands. "You would hardly recognize Riverdale now," she said softly. "Or me, for that matter." "She would be proud of you," came Thomas's voice. He approached with respectful steps, carrying his own small tribute, a carved wooden bird that one of the factory workers had made. Sophia accepted his presence with grateful silence. After a moment, she said, "I used to think lighting that candle would somehow bring her back. Childish, perhaps." "Not childish," Thomas corrected gently. "Faith rarely follows rational paths. And in a way, perhaps it did work, not by changing the past, but by creating a future neither of us could have imagined." As they walked back toward town, the late afternoon sun gilded Riverdale's recovering landscape. Phoenix Works smokestacks rose against the horizon, no longer symbols of one man's wealth, but of an entire community's resilience. "I've been offered a teaching position at the State University," Thomas said unexpectedly. "Economic theory with a focus on cooperative models during financial crisis." Sophia felt a moment of alarm. "You're leaving Riverdale?" "No," he replied with certainty. "I'll commute twice weekly for lectures. My place is here, my work, my purpose." He paused, then added more softly, "The people I care about are here." The implication hung between them, neither quite ready to define the relationship that had evolved from desperation to collaboration to something deeper and more complex. That evening, when Sophia lit her candle, she found Thomas on her porch again, his expression uncharacteristically nervous. "I realize something today," he said without preamble. "All these months, we've been so focused on rebuilding everything around us that we've hardly acknowledged what was being built between us." Sophia felt her heart quicken. "Thomas, please," he interrupted gently, "let me finish while I have the courage." I'm not the man I was, neither the arrogant industrialist nor the broken soul ready to end everything. I'm something in between, still finding my way, but I know with absolute certainty that whatever path lies ahead, I want to walk it with you beside me. Sophia's eyes filled with unexpected tears. I've been afraid to want that, she admitted. Afraid to believe in happiness after losing so much. Thomas took her hands in his, their warmth a contrast to the autumn chill. Then perhaps we need a new ritual, he suggested, not lighting a candle for what's been lost, but for what might yet be found, together. As winter approached once more, Riverdale prepared for a season that no longer carried the same dread it once had. Phoenix Works had weathered its first year, proving that even in the darkest economic times, community and innovation could forge a path forward. On a clear December evening, Sophia lit not one candle, but two in her window. One for Claire's memory, and one for the future she was finally ready to embrace. Across town, in the house he had once nearly abandoned in despair, Thomas Blackwell did the same, their separate lights forming a promise that would soon be shared. The millionaire walked again, not as a titan of industry, but as a man humbled and transformed by near destruction and unexpected redemption. And beside him walked a woman who had found the courage to move beyond grief toward purpose, their individual journeys merging into a single path, illuminated by the simple faith that what seems lost can sometimes, in its own way, return.